I'm very pleased to be here, not least because this subject is something I am really passionate about, and I hope as I speak to you this morning that'll come through, and I'd like to explain why I think it's important. I often say that planning is all about outcomes, and it really, really is. It is about helping deliver homes, jobs, great places for people to live in, to work and spend their leisure in. But you have to get the process right as well. You rarely get the best outcomes unless the right process is in place. And I think Jonathan alluded in the introduction to, I've done a lot of work on systems thinking, where we strip processes down and put them back together again. And as part of that process, we identify, as part of that learning journey, if you like, we identify which parts of the process you kind of have to do, which bits add value, which bits are optional, if you like. And the thing about design review, it is optional-ish. I know the NPPF says we have to do it, but in a sense, certainly when we took it on board in Exeter, it was seen as something extra. But from my perspective, it's that part of the process which adds value. It really does add value. And I hope that comes out in what I'm going to say to you this morning. Okay, so what am I going to talk about this morning? I'm going to majorly focus on what we've done in Exeter, why we've gone down the design review route and how that came about. And I think as I do that, that'll bring out a lot of the issues which are kind of pertinent and important. I then want to go on and specifically talk about why it's really important to have an independent design review panel or access to an independent design review panel. I think that's absolutely key, and I'll explain why I think so. I then want to go on and talk about getting it right, making sure that you use the benefits or of the design review panel in the best possible way. It's about how it fits in the wider process. It's only part of the job to say, oh, we've got a design review panel we can go to, and I'll explain why. What I'm not going to talk about is what is design review, not least because I had a canny guess that Jonathan might spend a part of his 10 minutes going through that. But actually, I'm pretty sure I've got an intelligent and well-informed audience here, so you'll come with some knowledge at least. And if not, what I would say is pick the brains of others in the room. There's lots of familiar faces here to me who I know will explain it in way more detail and much more articulately than I can. That said, if you really are starting from scratch, there are a couple of publications I'd recommend. They're both Cade publications. They're a little bit long in the tooth in some ways. They're a little bit dated, but I think they're both still really relevant. So there's Design Review, Principles and Practices, which is the kind of, what's that series they have? The Dummies Guide to such and such. Well, that's the kind of Dummies Guide to Design Review, but it's actually really good. And arguably, the second one is even more important. That's about the value of good urban design. So, tap up the expertise in the room, as I say. Back to the Exeter story. Why did we do it? Okay, that's been alluded to already. That's what the National Planning Policy Framework says. We didn't do it because of that. We were kind of on the case beforehand. But I have to say, when that came through, that really helped us sell the idea to members. Other prompters. This is our core strategy. Like pretty well every local planning authority, we've got lots of very aspirational design policies and objectives. This is one of the 10 key objectives of the core strategy. This is just some text taken from one of the master plans covering an area of an urban extension in Exeter. So you'll see the very familiar language there: quality environment, desirable place to live and work, high quality, local identity, sense of place, all those kind of things. And I could show you lots and lots of different corporate documents from Exeter talking about our role in the regional capital of the Southwest, how we want to build on our fantastic historic heritage, how we're committed to great design. So we really did talk the talk. But did we walk the walk? I'll show you a couple of slides. No, I don't think we did. So we had all those words, we had fantastic policies, we had all the members saying great things, but actually, that's the kind of places we were delivering. So this is from late 80s, I think, and this is a hall of residence on the university campus. I don't think they'd mind me saying, because I think they're any more proud of it than we are. But that's the kind of development that was getting through our system. And I think that picture shows it up. You've kind of got kind of Billy No-Mates there. I'm not sure if it's a Billy or Wilhelmina. But, you know, he or she is sat there looking really sad and lonely. Not really that kind of local distinctiveness and great sense of place we were talking about. So we had to change things. Clearly, we weren't going to get it. We weren't getting it right. So that's student accommodation, but that's not a one-off. It's fairly typical housing. We've all seen lots of that, and there's lots of that around Exeter. Apologies for the slides. I bet you all thought you were going to come to an urban design type conference and see some really whizzo buildings. I think Elaine and John will maybe sort that out in the future, but I'm going to let you down on that one. So, what was going wrong? I'll tell you what, it wasn't lack of commitment by officers. I honestly think we've got a really well-motivated team in Exeter who really want to do the right thing. In fact, it wasn't lack of resources. At the time, we had a design and development team. We had qualified urban designers. We were, I would suggest, relatively well-resourced in design terms. So what was it? Well, I think I'll probably leave that to the fire break for people to argue about what was going wrong. But from where I was sat, there was often a difficult relationship, is that a political way of putting it, between the development side and the local authority side. Lack of trust, perhaps. And you kind of talk to the officers and they'd blame the developers. As a manager, I'd get the phone calls from the developer or their agent moaning about the officers. There was a lot wrong with it. And, you know, it was a blame game. But the point was we weren't getting it right. Got one more rotten slide, I'm afraid. So there we go. That was, I think that was early 90s, big volume house builder. That's it's probably one of the best bits of that development, actually. But what I'm trying to point out is we were delivering houses. We were doing well in terms of our local plan targets, but we weren't delivering the great places to live we talked about. So what did we do? Well, myself and a couple of colleagues thought, well, we need to kind of break the cycle, if you like, and we'd spoken to a couple of people about design review, and we went looking for an appropriate model. But we had lots of false starts. There was a lack of enthusiasm amongst some within the council. I think members, one or two members, were thinking, why do I need this? Why do I need a panel to tell me how to vote at planning committee? That was the way they saw it. I think one or two officers thought, do we really need this? There were other barriers. There was the old favourite, lack of money. It was going to be, how would one finance this? And when we raised it with developers or their agents or their architects, well, the very thought, they couldn't possibly believe that we wouldn't believe that their designs were fantastic without question. So we had to work really hard about setting up, and a big issue for us was the geographical area. Exeter is a relatively small district council. The boundary is really tight around the city. So, you know, we probably wouldn't justify enough business for a monthly meeting of a panel. But equally for us, we just didn't necessarily see the synergies, at least immediately, with some of our neighbours with perhaps a more rural bent. So we looked at a few different options and we persevered. I think somewhere along that process, Jonathan must have come along and spoken to us, and that seemed the ideal model, something done on at least a sub-regional basis initially, spreading now to something slightly larger. And And eventually we took that to members and they were happy to approve it. And I'll talk through about how you sell it to members shortly. But the other thing, of course, or the attractive thing to them was it was a no-cost solution. So we talked about why we set it up in Exeter. And I want to go on and talk a little bit about why independent is important. Because one of the models we looked at is whether we could do this ourselves. And this was for a long time before Jonathan came along. This was the only real option. It was set it up ourselves, and we would have to find the professionals to sit on the panel. We would have to resource the logistics, etc., etc. That was really quite difficult for us. Lack of resource, lack of time to do that kind of thing, lack of access perhaps to the best professionals and certainly to the range of professionals. But also, if we did it ourselves, we always thought there would be this charge that we weren't, that anything that went to the panel wasn't independent, that it was an Exeter City Council panel. And I think that's a legitimate charge, to be honest. And we did go and look at some other panels which are done more locally, and some of them even have member involvement, members chair. And from my perspective, at least, I thought that kind of muddied the waters a little bit. And I think there's loads of reasons why it's absolutely key to be independent. Firstly, it needs to be demonstrably objective, so that anybody involved in the process, however peripherally, can see that this is a standalone group of professional people, separate from the council, without any interest on behalf of the developer, and that gives the panel the freedom to look at things very analytically, very objectively. And I've also written down there, having it objective and at arm's length takes the heat out of it a little bit. I think some of the issues we had were down to misunderstandings about relative roles between the planning authority and the development industry. And having somebody who's demonstrably arm's length, I think, helps that enormously. More practically, I've alluded to this, logistics and cost. It would have been a really difficult job for us to arrange the logistical side that supports the panel. There's obviously setting up meetings, and Jonathan will no doubt tell about some headaches he's had over a cup of coffee at some stage. But getting the plans in from people, getting them distributed to panelists, getting the right panelists in, getting that access to a range of panelists, we simply would not have been able to do that as a local authority. The other element of that, of course, is cost. Ultimately, I needed to be able to sell the solution to members as a cost-neutral solution. We didn't have any budget to put towards it. The alternative, of course, is you get it solely funded through the developers, through the applicants for planning permission. We obviously looked at that, and that, in a sense, is the model that Jonathan's panel works on with some variations. But we felt that would have been more difficult for us to do if we were the direct deliverer. So if you think about it, it's as the applicant, you're paying the council for a planning application, at which you're paying the council's professional officers to review your scheme, and then you're going to have to pay again to the council to get some other officers to review the scheme. I felt that was quite a difficult thing to sell. And actually, we don't charge for pre-application discussions in Exeter. We try and make ourselves as officers as accessible as we can within the process. The kind of third-party model, the independent model, suited us down to the ground, whereas the cost is paid directly to the panel. We're not involved. Again, it emphasises that element of it being at arm's length. And it's probably worthwhile at this stage just talking a little bit about the how we sold the panel to various applicants and the issue of cost. As I say, when we first mooted it, there was some developer resistance. It was something different. This was people who dealt with this before. They were, I think, suspicious, arguably understandably, about why we would bring in other people to see it. And we use our powers of persuasion, and there is a fee to be paid, obviously, and that's direct to the panel. And we had one or two, I think, kickbacks early on about paying that fee. But actually, as time has gone by, that developer opposition has completely evaporated. I think pretty well we don't take all our schemes to design review panel, but we take the ones where we think the panel can add value. So we suggest it at an early stage to developers. And I think in recent times, it's pretty well 100% take up. I think they're happy. They're happy with the outcomes when they've done it before, or they're happy to talk to others about the outcomes that they've seen. The other thing, of course, is that what's really, really helpful is, and I'll explain what we do with the design review panel advice, but part of what we do is we put it in the committee report. And if we ask somebody, and I don't think this has ever actually happened, but I will do it, if we ask somebody to go to the panel and they refuse, we might put that in the committee report as well. I'm not sure if that would influence members, of course, but I always say to developers, why wouldn't you take it to the panel? Don't you want the panel to endorse your design? It's a way of de-risking the whole process in that sense. And if somebody's slightly guarded or slightly hesitant to do that, you kind of think, well, if you don't believe in your scheme being subject to peer review, why should I, or why should my members think it's a good scheme as well? And actually, this has worked really well for us because we try and de-risk the process going through. And I always say to developers, if you get the endorsement of the design review panel, it's going to be really, really difficult for the members to stand up at committee, well, sit down at committee, but vote you down on design in design terms. Slightly going off the subject there a little bit, but coming back to independence, I've alluded to this quite simply. If we use the contacts we had as individuals or through the council, I don't think we'd get access to the range of expertise that the design review panel here provides us with. And this is really important for me. And one of the great benefits, I think, of this panel is that it is multidisciplinary. It's not dominated by architects. We all know this, and I really, really strongly believe that, good design is something people argue, oh, it's a matter of taste. Well, no, it is. No, it isn't, rather. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. You can measure good design. Good design are places that work well, that function well, that meet their brief, that deliver, economic development, economic benefits. We can bring in lots of experts, look at the way the development or the place works, and give our members and our officers that much bigger picture. And I've seen some panels in operation when they've tended to be architect-dominated, and I don't think they work very well, personally. The panel as an arbitrator. When we first set up the IDEO Design Review panel, I thought one of its great benefits would be unravelling those knotty disagreements we have with certain applicants over certain design elements. I thought it might help us unravel those situations where you kind of you hit a situation where you simply cannot agree. You're sat around the table and you're being told this and you don't accept it. And I thought we would use the panel as a means to arbitrate between those difficult situations. Actually, in reality, that doesn't happen nearly as often as I thought it would. We probably only used it specifically for that issue, really clear issue of, which is absolutely fundamental to the scheme, probably only once in my memory. That's not to say that the panel doesn't have a really good role in arbitrating between, some of the philosophies around your starting point. And what works really well is the ability to speak to Jonathan beforehand and say, some of the things that are concerning us about this site or about this proposal are this. And that can, feed into the debate that you get. And ultimately, you keep looping back to that thing about independence and objectivity. If the panel are going to go one way, then either ourselves as a local planning authority or perhaps the applicant might have to just go, okay, fair enough. By definition, it was an argument that could have gone either way, but this is pointing you in a certain direction. My final point, but a really important one, is about the role of the panel as an educator. We're really lucky in Exeter because about half of Jonathan's panel meetings are within the city. Even better, they're within the civic centre. So I've used the opportunity to send some junior planners down there to listen to the debate, and that's fantastic for them. Usually you have to pay lots of money and come to events like this to get that kind of expertise and insight, but you can actually go down and listen to it in our committee room every other month. That's really important for me. It's really important for the case officers who sit in on the panels, and that's what we do. The case officer will nearly always go along and listen to that debate. It's a real pleasure, I think, to listen to the debate about something you've been involved in personally, to listen to those different perspectives. And the feedback I have from my officers, both junior and more experienced, is really, really positive. There's quite often something like, they picked up on such and such, and candidly, it wasn't something we'd majored on or thought was particularly important. Just getting that different perspective. And I mean, it really is that simple. When Jonathan asked me to do this presentation, he said, I want you to talk about why you as a local authority have a design review panel. And I could almost put up a single slide and say, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you key into different expertise to help you make the right decision? These decisions are really, really important for the future of the city, for the houses that people are going to live in, their offices or whatever that people are going to work in. They're really, really important decisions. So why wouldn't you get as much input from knowledgeable professional people as you possibly could? And I think what's really helped us in Exeter is the ability to sit in on panel meetings and to review the results of the panel's debate has led us to have a wider debate. It's raised the bar, I think, generally in the office. There's better understanding within the office of wider design issues. And I will use that word wider again because I do think we are looking at it perhaps more holistically than we did previously. And of course, there's the knock-on effect of that. So yes, we take a few dozen a year to the panel, but actually, if the officers are getting exposed to this kind of debate, learning to, if you like, love the language of design, perhaps getting a bit more confident when they listen, developing their own skills, then that has a knock-on effect of the schemes they deal with as officers, which don't necessarily go to the panel. So I think it's one of those unintended benefits of a design review panel. Certainly, as I say, very, very useful for us in terms of being able to host the meetings as well. Okay, so that's why I think independent is important, and independent is the way to go if you haven't got one already. But I also want to talk about getting it right. It's one thing saying, oh, we've got access to the panel. It's another thing understanding how you use that access. So the first thing to think about is, how is your design review panel going to fit in with your wider process? And if I just explain a little bit how we do it in Exeter, we, as I say, we don't charge for pre-application advice. We have a philosophy of front-loading pretty well everything we do. We will provide all the officers necessary for negotiating a scheme at the pre-app phase. We would involve statutory consultees and indeed others where we possibly can. The whole idea for us, and indeed for the developer, is by the time you get to committee, to have de-risked the process as much as you possibly can. And as I say, the DRP is critical within that. So, and it's worthwhile thinking about timing, where it fits in, and how you kind of treat the outcomes. So in Exeter, we will usually sit down with a developer, with a development team approach, as many of you in local authority will, I'm sure. And we'll sit down at the very outset and we'll map out the process we go through. And we've got two real elements to our pre-app process which help de-risk things. There's the DRP itself, but we also allow a presentation to members before they submit an application. And that works really well. It's to a kind of subcommittee of our planning committee. And in it, we allow the developer to speak for 15 or 20 minutes about a proposal. And the members can ask some questions. They've got to be very cautious about any predetermination. But it's very clear sometimes from the questions they ask what are going to be the key issues in terms of that particular proposal. So one of the issues for us is which comes first? Do you go to the members first or to the design review panel? You know, it's that kind of cart and horse scenario. And actually, it's not always straightforward as to what the best way to go is. Sometimes, if you're going to put something forward which is really challenging in usage terms, it's probably best to go to the members first. Get some kind of comfort that you're going to get a scheme which is going to be, you know, approved in principle, and then move on to the design stage. Other times, you know it's going to be a kind of knotty design thing, so you may want to go to the panel first. It's not by any means a perfect science, and sometimes timings dictate one or the other. But the thing we do really say to developers is go to the panel in a timely manner. Every scheme is different, and that will determine to a degree when you end up going to the panel, but don't leave it too late. Don't go at the point where you've designed everything except the design of the doorknobs, because you're wedded to your scheme then, and you're probably going to be less likely to respond to what the panel is saying. So we like to say to people, get going in a timely way, and we kind of route out that pre-app route, if you like. Moving away from the sort of process for an individual application, but talking more generally about the DRP process and introducing one. One of the things we struggled with a little bit was to get members on board. There was, you know what members are like, they're all different, but they all have a view, don't they? So my advice is to treat them differently and respect the fact that they all have a view. So what we did when we introduced this was we talked to people actually separately. So we spoke to the chair, we spoke to the portfolio holder, we spoke to different groups of members in different forums to explain why we thought this was a good thing. You know, at the time, one or two of them were scratching their heads saying, why do we need to do this? And this was at a time probably when we thought it was going to cost them something as well. But they were scratching their heads thinking, why do we need this panel if I've already got so-and-so's an urban designer and so-and-so's an urban designer? And being able to explain the value the panel can add. And actually what we did was we took one of our members to what we thought was a good example of a panel to try and sell the idea, was really, really important. I think it can go horribly wrong if you introduce it without fully involving members and explaining how it relates to their role. Timings, Crystal, I've talked about, and this issue here about how you report outcomes. So it is, what you get from the panel. Well, what you get from the panel is you get some verbal feedback on the day, and then that's followed up in a rather more detailed report, written report a few days later. But I think you need to think really carefully about how you use that information and how you treat it. And I think there's a couple of rules here. Firstly, the panel are great, but they're not the local planning authority, and they are a design review panel. So they will look at the design of a scheme. So there will still be lots of other things you need to consider. So just because the DRP give it a big thumbs up, you don't suddenly write out your report without a mindful of all the other things saying, yes, this is fantastic, members approve. You know that, of course. Equally, if there's some criticisms from the panel, and I think it's quite a tough process, and quite often there are reservations, etc., does that automatically mean you refuse the application? Maybe not, but maybe if you've done it in a timely way, you've got those criticisms or those comments early enough to be able to change it and still shape it and get it into, if you like, tip-top condition before it goes to committee. I think the other thing is think about, you know, how you report the outcomes in a literal sense. We effectively summarise the design review panel's comments in the committee report. We will draw out anything specifically they've spoken about or things that might be still slightly unresolved, which are still key to the decision. We don't routinely just attach the whole text. I have seen some authorities do that. I think committee reports are long enough already, to be honest, for members. So I think it's legitimate to summarise it. The other thing you could do, and we thought about this, was, well, you don't include any reference to the panel at all in the report. It's something which is part of the process. But again, I think there's a couple of reasons for doing it. This is very much part of that sort of value process I talked about, so why wouldn't you? And, you know, candidly, if you have got members there who are edging towards refusing something on design grounds, and you have got a bit in your report which says, well, actually, these independent learned people said this was fine, that does make your job a little bit easier as officers. Have things changed in Exeter? I think so. There's a lot of schemes that have gone through DRP in the last 3 or 4 years, which have not yet been completed. They're on a lot of them are being built at the moment. So, the proof will be in the pudding, and we've got still relatively few finished puddings, if you like. But that said, I do think it's working, and as I say, I do think we've got that wider understanding and benefits of design education, if you like, coming through the process and through the team. What's really pleased me is developer take-up now is absolutely excellent, as I alluded to. We don't have any opposition pretty well at all, unless any of my colleagues in the room can correct me. But I can't remember one where somebody's refused to go, basically. And the important thing is it's really embedded in the process now. It's very clear where it sits within the process. It's well understood by everybody, and we make great efforts to explain to any new developer. We obviously work with some developers over lots of different schemes, but if somebody's new, we explain to them exactly how the process works and how the process relates to the rest of the stuff we do. Importantly, I think it is really well respected by members. I honestly can't remember a refusal on design grounds where they've gone completely against what the design review panel said. Now that may be coincidence, but I honestly think that's the case, and I was racking my brains. So I did say the proof will be in the pudding. So have things changed? Okay. So that first hall of residence I showed you at the university, because the university is growing like topsy and we've got to accommodate loads and loads more students, this is now one which is built opposite. I'd like to think you'd agree with me that it's in a different league in design terms. Shame about the pointing on the wall there, which I think they got pretty horribly wrong. But if you can avert your eyes from that and imagine the trees when they're grown a little bit more, I think that's it's a much more striking building, a much better place. And our friend in the earlier photograph will no doubt be sat on these benches with some friends this time. Let's hope so, anyway. So there's that one. Here's a picture somebody might recognise in the room. This is the kind of thing we get thrown at us all the time as planners. We get these lovely drawings by architects, selling it to you, selling it to the members. Look how fantastic this is going to be. This was a big housing scheme, first phase of 700 or 800 houses down on the outskirts of Topsham, and that wooed the members and was widely endorsed by the panel. What does it look like? Well, it's not fully built yet, but it's getting there. It's getting there. I think that's going to be not too dissimilar from the picture when it's delivered. And I think, you know, a quality piece of house building there. And that's the same scheme there. So I think we're not doing too bad. This is part of a new Steiner Academy in the city. This was a big win for us on all kinds of, for all kinds of reasons. There'd already been a very small Steiner school in the city, and there had lots of demand and lots of money from government, because they're a free school, to be able to deliver a wing-dinging new facility. And they told us, we want to come in and talk to you about our ambitious plans for a wing-dinging new facility. So they came to us and they said, yeah, we want to convert some office space in Pines Hill Business Park. I don't know if any of you know Pines Hill Business Park, out by the ring road, and you kind of think, really? That's going to be your wing-digging new environment? So we pressed them on why they thought that was a good place, and they said, oh, it's very accessible. And I'm thinking, no, it's not. And they said, no, it's very accessible by car, and there's lots of car parking. So that's what they liked about it. And they also liked about it because it had lots of green space next to it by the Valley Park, and they like doing stuff outside in the sort of Steiner ethos. So we kind of listened. We're far from convinced, and luckily we had some good employment protection policies to say you really shouldn't go there, and pointed them in direction of a completely different site. And this was, and I probably should have brought some more slides, but this is Thomas Hall, which is a fantastic listed sort of Georgian-style house up by the north of the city, up by the university, sat within several acres of designed landscape grounds, had been used latterly as a hall of residence by the university, but then been disposed of. We had hotel groups looking at it, but nothing had come forward, and it was a listed building which was falling into disrepair. And we said, why don't you have a look at this site? You've got character to build on. You've got a lovely house there, which does need a bit of TLC, but you know, in principle, you can extend it, you can build an annex to it, etc., etc. And you've got these fantastic landscape grounds to do your outdoor stuff in. And this is the kind of kindergarten, so this is for really little ones right up to A-level students. And these are kind of pods sat within the grounds for the very small children. And they went to have a look at the site, and it was absolutely wow. It was exactly what they wanted, which really did beg some questions about why they were looking across the other side of the city. And we also did point out this had fantastic bus connection to the city centre. It was about a 10 minutes walk from St David's Station, and they do have a kind of sub-regional catchment. So it was absolutely ideal for them. And this was one of the very early ones that I think we took through design review. And it worked really well because, again, it was a testing site. What they've done is they've effectively built a wing to the main building and done some stuff within the covered, the walled garden there, but very, very sympathetically restored the main house itself so that it reassumes its prominence within the landscape. And it was an absolutely win-win for everybody. So that's a kind of win-win for proactive planning. But where the design review panel was really, really important was getting a proposal through our members which was slightly bigger footprint than a previous scheme they'd approved for a hotel, which had proved awfully difficult. And there was some give and take on some of the landscape and the trees here. But I think having that, again, that holistic look at it and that endorsement by the wider panel managed to get the scheme through much more easily than would have been the case. So again, this is a student accommodation. Is that fuzzy again? I think that's fuzzy as well. Another student accommodation scheme. We're probably the national leaders in delivering student accommodation. That's what we seem to get in the city centre at the moment. But the quality compared with the stuff which was going up in the late 80s and the early 90s is literally different class. Now, Jonathan may know, I can't actually remember if this one went through design review, so I might be cheating a bit. But my point is, even if it didn't, it's part of that wider conversation we're now having within the team. Is that perfect? Okay, thank you very much.